romance, love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 30. Our Natures Dovetailed. Hello, husband.
Hello, my impassioned mistress.
Okay, pick an interesting one there.
There is no definitive reference to Jane in this book, in this chapter, I mean.
Right, okay.
There's a moment where she's called mistress, and that's it. And then I think later in the chapter, when
St. John refers to her as impassioned.
He says, you're ambitious, and he said, no, that was not the word I would use. You are impassioned. So you are my impassioned mistress. Charlene, this was a fun chapter. I think maybe it's just because of the contrast of the previous one, where it was like, okay, she's just recovering and she's just sitting in the house, whereas now she's finally healed up.
Yeah.
Right? She's getting to hang out and spend
And now
some time
we're
with
getting
people.
to know Diana and Mary and St. John, so maybe it's a little more interesting for us, especially the way that Jane is painting their characters.
Yeah, this was a much more enjoyable chapter. I just flew right through it.
Oh, good.
It's not very long. Too,
yeah, it's also a
thankfully.
shorter chapter, so that's maybe another reason why you flew through it.
Yeah, Charlotte, come on, keep it going like that. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the SparkNote summary for Chapter 30. Jane befriends Diana and Mary, who admire her drawings and give her books to read. St. John, on the other hand, remains distant and cold, although he is never unkind. After a month, Diana and Mary must return to their posts as governesses. St. John has found a position for Jane running a charity school for girls in the town of Morton. Jane accepts, but St. John presumes that she will soon leave the school out of restlessness, perhaps because he himself is quite restless. His sisters suspect he will soon leave England for a missionary post overseas. St. John tells his sisters that their Uncle John has died and left them nothing, because all his money went to another unknown relative. Jane learns that it was Uncle John who led Mr. Rivers into his disastrous business deal.
Yeah, I think we've discussed before that, now we're in essentially the third act of the book. And so, there was that transition and she's sleeping outside and then she finally gets taken in. Now we're kind of getting a sense of these characters that are going to inhabit this final act of the book. And so I really just enjoyed this. And I think it also, maybe it's because Jane's been through so much, especially with Lowood, that now that things are kind of picking up, even though she doesn't have Rochester, but she is in a pretty ideal scenario where it makes it much more enjoyable to read, because when your protagonist is in a good mindset, it kind of puts you in a good mindset, I guess, right?
Sure. If you're happy for Jane, then it makes it an easier read, especially because that chapter where she was wandering the moors, it was very sad and very rough to read. Yeah. But, and especially when you start this chapter, Jane kind of sets up this really idyllic scenario of her life as she's restored, physically and mentally with Diana and Mary. Because she just explains how she has this companionship that she really enjoys. She's out in nature. She's learning German from Diana. And she's reading and talking to the girls about these books. And she just enjoys herself so much. It's just a wonderful, calm environment for her.
Yeah, the first page of the chapter is just terrific. I think the description of Morehouse and the surroundings and how Jane's really enjoying herself, it's so pleasant. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of us at our house.
Oh, yes?
We are still working through the kinks. We've got to do some minor repairs here and there. But it's like, I think you mentioned it before. There are moments where I'll go outside and just observe my property.
Right.
And
it's a little different now that it's if you have your own land, when you're seeing the birds that visit or you're looking at the plants, you're like, oh, this is part of my environment.
Yeah, and now that there's fewer and fewer tasks to do. Yes, I'm still recording a podcast and reading a book, but we have more time to kind of relax and really enjoy it. And so maybe that's another reason I like this chapter so much, is that I can kind of relate to it. Yeah,
that's a good point. But, we also get this wonderful depiction of Diana and Mary. They're so warm, so inviting. They're again, positive female characters in Jane's adult life.
Oh, yeah. Total besties. I did pull a quote because when I mentioned how everything's so positive in this first page, I swear Charlotte uses the word pleasure like 3 or 4 times in the first couple of in the first couple of paragraphs, right?
Right. Really highlighting it.
Yeah, and one of the quotes, when Jane describes the relationship with Diana and Mary, she says, quote, "The pleasure arising from perfect congeniality of tastes, sentiments, and principles."
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, for everything she's been through in her life. Yes, I don't know if Helen was like a BFF, because they did have a lot in common and she did learn from her. Mm-hmm. But it's like now she's finally found her, not an equal, but I mean, the fact that they're both governesses as well.
Yeah, I think in some ways they're equals. And, if you're talking about Helen Burns, it's like, yeah, Diana and Mary, she's just spending time with them and there's no negative, as opposed to when she was at Lowood and they were hungry, they were cold, mm-hmm. they were, maltreated. And that's why, it's maybe not as good of a memory for Jane as being here with these girls in Morehouse. Yeah,
I think the only sadness with that would just be that they know it's going to come to an end soon because Diana and Mary have to leave.
Yeah, that's true. But I feel like Jane does set up all of this kind of beautiful scenario. How can she be happier? But she drops in a little mention that she's not quite peaceful because she still thinks about Rochester.
Yeah, she even references, I think, her broken idol and her lost Elysium. It's very dramatic. Like, I totally forgot about it. I had to ask you before we recorded that. I was like, wait, she really yearns for Rochester in the chapter? Because it seems like she's moved on. I mean, she even says something to the effect of, like, I'm not referring to this anymore. Yeah. Like, she's trying to move on with her life, but then it's kind of hard to, obviously.
Well, I guess she doesn't want to dwell on it in the book where, as she's writing her thoughts out. But, she has to remind the reader that she does still think about him. It's the deep, great love of hers. She's not just going to forget about him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But do you think she can be truly happy at Morehouse, even though he's not there? Because she has her friends and she's hopefully going to have a job shortly. And like I said, the surroundings are nice, but
yeah. I mean, I guess it's twofold because obviously Mr. Rochester being gone is a big impact. She's very sad about that, and since she truly loved him, I don't think it's going to be that easy to just forget about him and just be happy. But there also have been 2 times that we've seen in this book where Jane has shown that she is restless with her life, and I think it starts at Lowood, where after she's been a teacher, she seems like she has a very tranquil and predictable life. But when Miss Temple marries and leaves, she feels tired of the routine of 8 years, as she says. Mm-hmm. So she needed something different and more challenging, and that's why she decides to be a governess. And then there's an instance before Mr. Rochester comes where she is wandering Lowood on the 3rd story, and she says, this is from chapter 12, "I could not help it. The restlessness was in my nature. It agitated me to pain sometimes."
It's a kind of an interesting reversal, because as I was reading this, Jane strikes me as someone who I thought could be fine in one place. Have I misjudged her? Because or is it a situation where if she had the right man to settle down with,
that's what it seems like. Yeah.
Then she'd be okay. Then she could. I mean, because I know that people can be happy in their lives without finding love, but sometimes, and I know this from personal experience, when you do find love, it just adds that extra little layer of happiness,
right? Totally.
And it allows you to be a little bit more content and tranquil, And so, perhaps she can't quite find that tranquility at Morehouse. I don't know.
And there happens to be another person who doesn't seem as tranquil at Morehouse that Jane observes. St. John seems to be in a similar situation with being a parson of a small village where he wants to see more, challenge himself, and do something.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Is that why he seems so cold and so depressed? Because like Charlotte gives like a really vivid description of his sermon, and it's just so unfeeling. I felt like it just, it's really kind of cold and antiseptic, and I'm wondering if that it kind of matches his personality. And is there a way that, I would think that people in the clergy are supposed to be a little bit more upbeat, but maybe is it just like, okay, he's stuck in this particular station and he kind of longs for something else, right?
Yeah, well, it does make St. John a fascinating character that Jane is portraying here. Just why is he the way he is? There's definitely a few more chapters where we could get to know him a little better. But he does say, in reference to his life as a parson, quote, "To live here buried in morass, pent in with mountains, my nature that God gave me contravened, My faculties, heaven bestowed, paralyzed, made useless. So he just feels like he's kind of trapped, I think.
You never want to be buried in morass.
Classic quote.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Jane even points out later, that, or I think earlier actually, she says, zealous in his ministerial labors, blameless in his life and habits, he yet did not appear to enjoy that mental serenity, that inward content, which should be the reward of every sincere Christian and practical philanthropist.
Yeah, I'm sure like everybody involved in the clergy does have some sort of internal struggle. You know, do they think about what they're doing is meaningful, or should they be doing more, or are they doing too much? And there's this really interesting dichotomy in this chapter when we get in this conversation about that tranquility versus ambition. Like, can you be happy with what you're doing, or do you have to get more out of?
Yeah, where I feel like St. John is not being fulfilled by these tasks that he has. So he thinks, well, maybe if I am somewhere where I really have to strive or struggle, then he feels better. Like, oh, I'm actually I'm doing something worthwhile, maybe. Which is, I guess a fair point. I don't know if he's actually going to be the perfect kind of a missionary.
I wonder.
Yeah.
Unless he's very productive,
Yeah.
or it's like, okay, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to convert everybody.
Is he going to be convincing, reassuring people that God is the answer to their problems?
Yeah. But then he's just going to be ready to move on to the next place. And I'm sure that would probably be very much appreciated by the church, because they want to get as many areas covered, right? And he's not going to be he's going to be too complacent.
Oh,
so yeah, he would go on to the next one. But yeah, he does strike me as being, he's very ambitious. And like I said, there's that whole idea of ambition.
Yes, and then there's this whole conversation that happens between St. John and Jane where, the idea of one being ambitious and restless, it comes up. There's a point where St. John says to Jane, in reference to he's not thinking that Jane's going to stay long as a teacher at this small village school. He says, quote, I read it in your eye. It is not of that description which promises the maintenance of an even tenor in life. And Jane says, I am not ambitious. He started at the word ambitious. He repeated, no, what made you think of ambition? Who is ambitious? I know I am, but how did you find it out?
It's really bizarre. Like, I'm wondering, like, why is he so defensive about being thought of as ambitious? And is that not the nature of a clergyman? That's why you start to get to feel he's a very mysterious character, as we've discussed. And I'm starting to kind of get the idea that, is he hiding something? Like, why is he
I don't know
worried?
if there's also a little bit of shame that he's not happy, maybe. Like Jane says before, that he should have sort of mental serenity, inward content as being this good Christian. So, and it doesn't seem like he is. So, in a similar way to, I think, Jane, when she says earlier in chapter 12, when she's at Thornfield and how she's still restless there before she meets Mr. Rochester, obviously, she says something along the lines of, other people may blame her who likes because she's not happy. And then she goes on to say that restlessness was in her nature, that men feel that restlessness and women can feel it too. And as Jane makes that point of men being able to feel restless, we have St. John feeling restless, and he's maybe made to do great things. And in that nature, does that mean that Jane is made to do great things? Do you think?
Well, it kind of reminds me of that very popular expression, which is think globally and act locally. St. John seems to aspire to great deeds on a grand scale, whereas I think Jane's great things will be more suited to like her immediate surroundings. Like she seems to be happier teaching Adele than she was at Lowood. Like, as long as she finds that sort of inner peace, I think she could be content. Whereas I think St. John needs more, I don't want to say affection, just more notoriety, right?
Right.
And he feels like he needs to help as many people as possible to seem fulfilled, right? I think Jane could find it from just an inner circle.
Yeah, knowing that the people around her are happy and she's made them happy. Whereas St. John, probably he wants to see the effects of what he's done on a larger scale. He wants to know that whole people are grateful to him, I guess. Yeah,
true. And like I said, St. John's a very complex character in that regard,
Yes, Jane's descriptions of Diana and Mary are nice and comforting, but she spends more time describing St. John. He's more of a puzzle, I think, and more interesting than his siblings.
Yeah, it is kind of easy to gush about your new BFFs, but sometimes aren't we more interested in why somebody wouldn't like the same things we do rather than people share our interests?
Interesting.
Yeah, like, I know it's kind of might be a little bit of a stretch, but you always hear about actors saying how much they enjoy playing villains. Well, I figure most actors, movie stars, can sort of be thought of as being heroes, and and so that they can kind of should be second nature. They can figure that out. But when they have to dive into the character of a villain, it allows them to kind of do a little bit more digging. And I'm wondering if that's what happened with Charlotte here, is where it's easy for her to just talk about how great the sisters are because Jane and them obviously relate, but there's so much more to uncover about St. John, right?
That's true. That's a good point. Like, it's like St. John, he's she can't understand him, so that's why she focuses on him. And as she's probably, I think she said before, she doesn't have a lot of experience with men, so this is a totally different kind of man that she's kind of talking to and getting to know, and he's kind of appealing, I guess, in a way of why is he like this.
You have heard of employment for me?
Yes, but it is a service of poverty and obscurity. You may even think it degrading. My parish at Morton requires a school for girls, and that school requires a mistress. Will you take the post?
Oh, yes. I thank you with all my heart.
But you comprehend me. It is a village school. Your scholars will be poor girls, quite unlettered. There is a small cottage also attached to the school, 2 rooms only. It will be a monstrous labor.
I understand what I undertake.
So now we're coming towards the end of this chapter. We've gotten to know St. John a little bit, and then we get a little bit of more of the Rivers' personal history with the introduction that their uncle has died, and they're disappointed at him leaving all of his money to another relation.
Yeah, it's really a weird bombshell to just kind of drop at the end of that.
It does
chapter.
seem awkward,
Yeah.
It kind of shows, I think, how comfortable maybe that the Rivers are with Jane, that they don't mind sharing this kind of really personal experience with her, which brings me around to something we set up in the previous episode of when should Jane, if she should, tell the Rivers her personal history.
You think this would be a good time to do it?
I'm just pointing out that they shared something. Maybe she could share something.
Oh, is that how it works? When somebody reveals something, you have to
Quid
reveal
pro
something
quo.
back? Yeah, no, I don't think it would be a good time. I
Yeah.
really feel like the Rivers have enough to deal with.
Sure.
It's a situation where I could see her confiding in Diana and Mary first. They're all tight.
Yeah, I mean,
but at the same time,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like the sisters would have had to really push her to get that out. And they don't seem like the type. Like, they seem like they're really just letting her go. They're just enjoying the friendship.
Yeah, that's true.
But
Well,
so, yeah, I don't think I would. And I was going to ask you, it just seems weird that Uncle John's passing is almost an afterthought. It's really awkwardly placed in there where it's just like, hey, I got a letter and our uncle's dead. And then there's this, now that I know how the book ends, there's this really, really obvious foreshadowing related to Jane's predicament here. That's like, reading it the second time, it's like, oh, it seems kind of a little bit forced, And I've gushed for 29 chapters about how much I've enjoyed this book and I enjoy Charlotte's writing, but this is like the first time where I don't know, I got to give Charlotte a little bit of a demerit on that one. I'm not really impressed with how she introduced this plot point.
Well, that's fair. I wouldn't really know how I could introduce this important plot point, important setup for something that happens later, but, she did it the best she could.
The only thing I could think of is if they had set up the passing of Uncle John, like right when St. John comes home that first time.
Oh.
Like when they come in the house and then he's just like, oh, hey, by the way, I just got word that our uncle passed away, rather than just, hey, we're all living together and everything's great. And then you put it in right, and puts you right at the end of a chapter like that, where it's like, okay, this is supposed to drive something into the next, I don't know. It's like that. It felt a little bit forced, but yeah.
Hey, it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you going to do?
So yeah, now Jane, we get to the end of the chapter, like you said. Jane's really fully recovered physically, and she's ready to move on to this new sphere of life that St. John has presented her with as being a teacher.
Yeah, did you really think, Morehouse to me always did seem like a rehab facility, right? More or less?
Yeah.
I don't think she could stay there forever, especially since she, yearned to work and earn her keep. I mean, very fortunate that a teaching gig, which would, be perfect for her, seems to have been lined up by St. John. So yeah, that's...
Yeah. And even in the first sentence of this chapter, Jane says, the more I knew of the inmates of Moore House. So definitely a rehab facility.
Oh, yes, of course.
So wrapping up this episode, Mike, we come to the part of the show where we share our meaningful passage or quote. So what did you pick out of this chapter?
I got a good one.
Of course.
It's a little bit long, and I think we're going to kind of have similar quotes because, like I said, the nature of this chapter is, to me, all about complacency versus ambition and just being able to enjoy what's going on around you. And so early in the chapter, Jane is talking about the complex character of St. John, and she says, quote, I think, moreover, that nature was not to him that treasury of delight it was to his sisters. He expressed once, and but once in my hearing, a strong sense of the rugged charm of the hills, and an inborn affection for the dark roof and hoary walls he called his home. But there was more of gloom than pleasure in the tone and words in which the sentiment was manifested. And never did he seem to roam the moors for the sake of their soothing silence, never seek out or dwell upon the 1,000 peaceful delights they could yield. And I feel like sometimes people do have a tough time stopping to kind of smell the roses, right? Like, it's a pretty good setup there. I mean, unfortunately, with the passing of their father and stuff, but, you know, it seems like St. John seems to have a much higher purpose, and he just can't seem to enjoy the small things. And I really feel like this is Jane's opportunity for her to express how maybe he should be doing that, and then maybe we'll see that as the next couple of chapters roll on, that maybe she's going to show him how to do that, I hope. Yeah.
Oh, good point. Yeah. That would be a great, part of her character arc. Part of the reason why St. John would be, introduced to why are they in their lives? It would be nice if Jane helped out St. John.
Yeah, maybe something that she could have taken from Helen, the best character in the book. Maybe.
Yes.
So what is your meaningful quote? I have a strong sense that it's going to be something along the same lines.
Sort of. I think I've made mention before. I tend to favor quotes that highlight the romance in between Jane and Rochester, because that's always been a favorite part of this book. Mm-hmm. And there is one mention of Rochester in this chapter, so it's memorable to me. It's, quote, I was sure St. John Rivers, pure-lived, conscientious, zealous as he was, had not yet found that peace of God which passeth all understanding. He had no more found it, I thought, than had I, with my concealed and racking regrets for my broken idol and lost Elysium. Regrets to which I have latterly avoided referring, but which possessed me and tyrannized over me ruthlessly. So we kind of referenced that quote earlier.
Mm-hmm. Lost Elysium is a great line.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a vivid, as you like to say.
Very vivid.
Insight into what Jane's feeling right now, because you really think, oh, she sounds like she's happy. She's in this wonderful companionship with Dan and Mary. And then, oh, well, actually she's, as she says, racked with regrets. That's pretty harsh. But yeah, she also keeps, I find it fascinating how she keeps her feelings so much to herself, which is something that she's really done a lot throughout this book. So it's more moving to her that she has these emotions that she's showing to the reader, because that she doesn't show it to anybody else.
Okay.
And yeah, and the fact that she's just overwhelmed sometimes, can't help succumbing to these moments of regret.
Well, yeah, and what's funny is, like I said, she can go from, I wouldn't say chastising St. John for not being able to enjoy his, but she is saying, like, he can't seem to really appreciate what his predicament is, and yet here she is saying, like, basically, I think it's really great. He should be able to appreciate it, but then at the same time, she's like, "Man, I miss Rochester." Like even she can't appreciate this, because every once in a while, for every moment of happiness, Rochester crawls back into your mind.
Yeah, we don't know what secret regrets St. John is harboring.
I guess we'll find out in the next chapters, maybe.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at EyreGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.